Hello again, everyone. And as you'll see, this is called Robert the Bruce, a man with a plan. Fiona and I were at the Bannockburn rally the other week, and we enjoyed it. It was really good. Lots of stalls and everything. A friendly bunch of people as usual. And we thought about putting up a video from the footage that we got, but then Fiona suggested that she could bring in some other footage or other ideas about Bannockburn, about Robert the Bruce. So
as it happened, there was a lot more on the go. The week after that, it was Robert the Bruce's 750th anniversary of Bruce's birth. So there was another event up at Bannockburn, which was this time it was James Scott from the Scottish Resistance, who does sort of pop-up history talks to whoever happens to be there. So he was doing one of those, so I went along and filmed that. And then the third thing that got woven into it was that Stirling's archaeologist, a guy called Murray Cook, had an event around where was the actual battlefield and some other themes that I certainly hadn't heard of before. So we thought it'd be interesting to weave all of those into and make more of a story. And then just to sort of cap it off, one of the guests at the march was Stuart McHardy, who we featured a whole series of his talks on radical Scottish history. They're in our Scottish history playlist. And he also had covered the Battle of Bannockburn. So we've included his talk as part of the footage. So lots going on.
Fantastic then. So let's go ahead and watch.
O flower of Scotland, when will we see your like again? Nobody can fail to be moved by that song, and we've just had it being belted out at full volume by the Tartan Army, and everybody knows the last line is to send proud Edward's army home again. This week's episode comes from Bannockburn, and this is the battle that song is all about. Where we're standing right now is called Monument Hill, the Rotunda, and you can see Bruce's statue. And also round the top is the most beautiful poem by Kathleen Jamie. Here lies our land, every airt, beneath swift clouds, glad glints of sun, belonging to none but itself. We are mere transients who sing its westling winds and ferny braes, northern lights and siller tides. Small folk playing our part. Come all ye, the country says, you win me, who take me most to heart. Robert the Bruce was born on the 11th of July 1274, so that makes this year his 750th birthday. So the group, the Scottish Resistance, decided to mark the event by doing one of their outdoor pop-up history presentations at Bannockburn that weekend.
This is where Robert the Bruce had his greatest victory, here on Bannockburn Field. And we should remember the Scots stood here on Bannockburn when England invaded Scotland with the biggest army they'd ever brought to totally crush Scotland's independence. With the Bruce, his brother Edward Bruce, the Black Douglas and other great Scots stood here on Bannockburn and sent them homeward to think again. 1305, William Wallace was executed in London. A year later, 1306, March 1306, Robert the Bruce was crowned King of Scots. When he was crowned King of Scots in 1306, Edward I decided to take action against Scotland. So he hunted down all the relatives of Robert the Bruce. They captured Thomas and Alexander Bruce, 20 and 21 years of age, at Carlisle. Only 20 and 21, Thomas and Alexander Bruce, captured near Carlisle, taken to Carlisle town centre, and they were hung, drawn and quartered. They also found the other brother of Robert the Bruce, Nigel Bruce, in the north of Scotland. and they brought him from the north of Scotland down to Berwick. And they took him to Berwick town centre, and he was hung, drawn, and quartered. They hunted Robert the Bruce, and he had to go on the run. For years and years he was on the run from the English who pursued him. There is a story though, that he never gave up. There's a legendary story of how he was in a cave, and he watched a spider trying to build a web, and it kept falling down the spider, but it never gave up. It kept on going back until eventually it had built a web. And that is a legend of why they have the saying that you will never give up, never give up. And that's what Robert the Bruce did. Over the years he built up an army. He took castle after castle back from the English, and the last castle to fall was Stirling, and that was in June of 1314, the 23rd and 24th of June, 1314. It's the Battle of Bannockburn, when Robert the Bruce, who led a smaller army than the English army, defeated the English and sent them homeward. So think again. Folks, we should remember Robert the Bruce. He was a great hero, and we will one day win back Scotland's freedom.
Now, this site is where we choose to commemorate the battle, but the battle was fought over 2 days. Day one was likely fought at or near the National Trust building along the route of what was the old Roman road. Now, if, as the archaeologists think, the Roman road runs underneath the modern day road, that would indeed be a straight route to Stirling Castle. Legend also has it that Robert the Bruce raised his standard on that site, and the boar stone, which may have been a discarded millstone, it was in any event a stone with a hole in it, was found thereabouts. Although it used to be under glass and visible at the visitors' centre, oddly it disappeared in the 70s, just after Queen Elizabeth visited. Now, not suggesting that she went home with it in one of her handbags, but, they do have form, who knows? Anyway, its whereabouts are now unknown, but the legend places it there, so let's assume that's where day one was. The Stirling Castle is under siege from Bruce's brother Edward. It seems likely that this siege was completely set up in order to bait a trap, to bring the English king, the English army, bring them north. That way, Bruce knows exactly what route he's going to take. He's going to take the most direct route, the old Roman road that goes straight to the castle. That gives him lots of time to prepare. Bruce was a master military tactician, and he knew that in a straight set-piece battle he couldn't defeat an army that was much bigger, much better equipped than the Scots. But what he could do was use the terrain to restrict the movement of the English troops so that they were coming at the Scots at a pace that the Scots could deal with them. He used the relatively hard surface in an otherwise boggy area, building pits with stakes in them on either side of the road to kind of funnel the English into a narrower space. As they had at Loudon Hill, they used the terrain to their best advantage, and the Scots won the day. It wasn't a decisive victory, but they had halted Edward's advance, at least for the night. By no means had the full English army been deployed against the Scots. Edward himself didn't join the battle. They were probably just looking at it as some little skirmish. But what it did do, it forced the English army to camp overnight rather than marching straight on to the castle, which probably had been their plan. They moved eastward and they set up their camp beyond the Balquidderrock Wood in the field, bounded on two sides by two streams. A boggy, marshy field the Bannockburn at one side and the Pell Stream at the other. And that meant that the English had restricted their own movement. They're wearing heavy armour, they've got horses. Was this also part of Bruce's plan? Was that the point of day one? Did the Bruce pick that exact spot on the road to intercept the English, gambling that they would do exactly what they did, divert to the east and set up camp for the night in terrain that Bruce knew well? I had never actually seen the Bannockburn. I assumed it was quite a small, almost a ditch, but I was curious to see how this new location for the battle played into the landscape. So I went through Ladywell Park to a relatively new housing estate with street names like Pike and Claymore and Caltrops. And there along the edge of the wood is the Bannockburn. It is much wider than I expected it to be. The other thing we know about that time is that the River Forth was a good couple of feet higher at high tide. We know that from the location of an old dock that's next to Cambuskenneth Abbey. And it seems entirely likely that the ground was boggier and the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn were both even bigger then than they are now. Looking at this bit, it's flowing through quite a wooded area, and it might be that it's not very visible. So perhaps Edward didn't realise what a trap he was leading his men into. During the night, the Scots crept through Balquidderock Wood that lay between them and the English camp. You can still walk through the wood, and it is an atmospheric place, it really is. Even on a sunny June day, the early morning of the 24th of June, it would have been light quite early. The Scots came down through that wood. According to the information plaque at the beginning of the wood, within sight of the English army, the Scots fell to their knees, a mass was carried out. Of course, in those days, everybody was Catholic. Legend has it that Edward saw this and asked if the Scots were praying for his mercy. And the answer came back, no, they're praying for their sins. For Bruce, there was probably more at stake than just the independence of his country. Bruce, at this point, still excommunicated, may have seen this as a way of giving God the chance to show if he supported him or forgave him. Who knows? So battle commenced, and the Scots were successful in driving the English backward. It's been described as putting a cork back in the bottle because their movements are restricted, and they were getting more and more restricted the further back they went because these two streams flow together behind them. This was also the time that Bruce unleashed his tactical, strategic innovation. He took the traditional Scots defensive formation, which was the Shiltren, a group of men bristling with spears like a giant hedgehog, which no horse would charge. But as they found out in the Battle of Falkirk, it was vulnerable to archers because the Shiltren at that time couldn't move. The great innovation that Bruce brought was he trained his Shiltren to march. So now you had an impenetrable wall of spears once they were on the field beyond the wood, and that just pushed the English further and further back. If they'd been able to break through the ranks of the Scots or round them, they would have been able to make a managed dispersal to Stirling Castle where they would have been safe. And it's possible that they were trying to do this. But then the small folk, which were between 30 and 60,000 non-combatant volunteers who'd been waiting possibly on Coxet Hill and possibly on a signal from the Scots. It depends whether this bit was planned in or not. And given everything else that Robert the Bruce has planned, it seems likely he would also have planned this element as well. A signal is given. The small folk come directly towards Bannockburn battlefield, cutting off what would have been the English army's escape towards the castle. Now, they wouldn't necessarily have known that this was a mixture of old men, young children, women armed with pots and pans. They would have seen this as reinforcements, a fresh army, a huge army coming at them from the direction of their only escape route. That was it. The English panicked, tried to escape. Some of them mired themselves in mud. Some of them drowned in the Bannockburn, the Pell Stream. It wasn't just a victory for the Scots, it was a rout. it was to be a decisive kick in the teeth for the English, and that is what Bruce delivered.
A lot of people think it was just a Scotland-England thing. It wasn't. It wasn't. The day of the Battle of Bannockburn, there was an Irish division in the Scottish Army, and believe it or not, there was an English division. In the year 1314, the group, the Knights Templar, were outlawed throughout Europe. One of the havens was Scotland, because Robert the Bruce had been excommunicated by the Pope. And this was the only country, really, that the Knights Templar could actually live in peace without being hunted down and killed. So there was English Knights of the Knights Templar, Scottish Knights of the Knights Templar. In fact, they were probably at the head of the army of Robert the Bruce. So we were grateful to have these great knights there, whether they were English or Scottish, because these English people made Scotland their home. So you'd English knights, you'd Scottish knights, you'd an Irish division fighting here on Bannockburn to save Scotland from being invaded and robbed.
So were there Knights Templar at Bannockburn? There certainly were Knights Templar in Scotland. In the National Library of Scotland, there is one account of the battle written by the monk of Malmesbury, who's writing on behalf of the English side, and he describes the Scots as about 40,000 men split into 3 divisions, and not one of them was on horseback, but each was furnished with light armour, not easily penetratable by a sword. They had axes at their side and carried lances in their hands. They advanced like a thick-set hedge, and such a phalanx could not easily be broken. And we know the Knights Templar were in Scotland. We know they had a number of sites, including links with Roslin Chapel. We know that St Clair, 1st Baron of Roslin, fought with his 2 sons, John and William, at the Battle of Bannockburn. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility that there were some Templars there. And there is mention elsewhere of a charge by Scottish cavalry later on in the day. You can certainly imagine that the army of small folk coming down off the hill, if they had a couple of knights on horseback with them, that could definitely be something that would panic the English. But who knows? Scots Wha Hae, one of Burns' most famous poems, written after his visit to Stirling in 1786, when he actually saw the Borestone and was moved to write what's quite an angry poem. It was never published under his name in his lifetime, and that's because it's a really dangerous poem. In that last verse, he manages to reference the Jacobite Rebellion, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and ends with a call to arms. This was seditious talk that could lead to you losing your head, as happened to Baird and Hardy only 40 years later, and we'll be covering that on another podcast.
A wee thing about Robert the Bruce. In 1329, when Robert the Bruce was on his deathbed, he called to his side the Black Douglas, James Douglas, the Black Douglas. And he said to him he was sorry for all the bloodshed that had been caused during the Wars of Independence. Remember I told you earlier how all his brothers had been killed by the English, how his family had been captured and held in prison. A lot of bloodshed around that time, folks. And he said that he wanted the Black Douglas to take his heart to the Holy Land and place it in the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Jesus Christ. So when Robert the Bruce died, they removed his heart and they put it in a silver casket with a silver string, and it was carried round the neck of the Black Douglas. Now, he set off on a mission with other Scottish knights to take the Bruce's heart to the Holy Land, to place it in the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Jesus Christ. Well, on journey to the Holy Land, he stopped off in Spain, and he was met by King Alfonso of Spain. Now at that time, Spain
Spain was being invaded by the Moors from the Arab country. Does anybody remember the film El Cid with Charlton Heston? The Moors were invading Spain and the Spanish needed some help, so they asked for the help of the Black Douglas and the Scottish Knights. So the Black Douglas agreed and they took part in the Battle of Tiba, away back in 1330, August 1330. Now at that battle, they never told the Scots Knights about the fighting style of the Arabs, the Moors. They would fight and run away and come back again. So during the battle, thousands of these Moors split into two groups and started going away. The Scottish Knights pursued them, but they pursued them too far. The Spanish Knights held back. They knew the fighting style of the Moors. And all these great Scottish Knights that had fought at the Battle of Bannockburn were cut down. And what happened was, the Bruce's heart was brought back to Scotland and was buried under the high altar at Melrose Abbey. An amazing thing, folks. Every year in August, in that small town near Malaga in Spain, town of Tiba, thousands and thousands of these people in Spain go out to remember Earl Douglas, the great Scottish hero. Isn't it amazing, folks? People actually remember our heroes more than the Scots here, who are denied their history. They keep the history of Scotland from us, folks. They keep our history from us.
And that's a curious thing, isn't it, that Bruce should have ordered his heart taken to the Holy Sepulchre and the tomb where Jesus Christ lay. It's quite a statement, isn't it? And there's an intriguing possibility put forward by Stirling's archaeologist that this again is testament to Bruce's skills as a planner. Because this is a man who'd been excommunicated, not just for murdering a rival, but for murdering him under flag of truce on holy ground. A triple whammy of really serious sins. And this was back in the day when everyone believed in God, in heaven, in hell. And Bruce knew where he was heading. He might have thought that God had shown him some favour when he won at Bannockburn, but he must have known he was still going to have to do some time paying for his sins. So if your heart was in a different place to the rest of the body, you would have double the funeral prayers said over you. And that possibly might speed your way back up to heaven. As it happened, Bruce's heart ended up at Melrose Abbey. But if he'd stuck to his original plan, it would have been in the same tomb as Jesus Christ. I mean, how much more of a plea for forgiveness could that be? That's planning. We've just been looking at some scenes of the countryside around Stirling, the view from Demyat Hill. But in that landscape, the only building that the Bruce would ever have been in that's still standing is Cambus-Kenneth Abbey. And to think that the Bruce might well have stood there the eve of the battle, planning his strategy, or perhaps months before that. We know he stored his baggage train at Cambus-Kenneth before Bannockburn, so he would have been there. And there's one final twist in the tale when it comes to Cambus-Kenneth Abbey, and that is the legend that it contains one of William Wallace's limbs. Wallace's maternal uncle was a member of the priesthood, and he had links with the monks of Cambus-Kenneth Abbey. Following Wallace's execution and dismemberment, 1/4 of his mutilated body was displayed on Stirling Bridge. Legend has it that a group of monks from Cambus-Kenneth went out one dark night and retrieved the remains of his body with the intention of giving it a Christian burial inside the grounds of the abbey. They did this without telling anybody outside the abbey of their actions, but given that Bruce was a frequent visitor at the abbey, in fact he held his first parliament after the Battle of Bannockburn at Cambus-Kenneth, so it seems unlikely that he wouldn't have known, assuming it was true. And there is a stone which did have the initials WW written on it, and occasionally you'll find a white rose placed on that stone. That story may not be true, but if it is, you can imagine Robert the Bruce on the eve of the battle for which he's planned almost every detail. He's at Cambus Kenneth, he's stored his baggage train there for the battle. Is he drawing strength from William Wallace, who's buried in the grounds? Offering up a little prayer, perhaps? I can't see someone who plans as exhaustively as Bruce has done, leaving any stone unturned, and that includes enlisting the help of William Wallace from beyond the grave.
I try my best to get the history of Scotland out to people and wake people up. This country is totally 100% controlled by Westminster. As we know, they've controlled hundreds of countries, but lots of these countries have since won their freedom. And one day, we will win back our freedom. We will never give up. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you.
An annual celebration of Bannockburn has taken place since at least 1914, when the 600th anniversary of the battle was marked with various events and activities. Most recently, all under one banner, have taken over the organisation of the annual march, and this year one of the speakers at the rally was the historian Stuart McHardy.
History is something that we all get exposed to at school. And in Scotland, we've been exposed to what technically, using a pretty esoteric historical term, can be described as keech. So much of what we're told our past is absolute bloody rubbish. And here today, on the field of Bannockburn, is one of the worst examples of the lot. You were all taught, if you were taught Scottish history at all, that Bruce and Wallace before him were fighting the Scottish Wars of Independence. What wars of independence? Scotland was a nation before England was a nation. We were fighting an invader. And never forget that.
Now let's listen to Stuart McHardy from his series Radical Scottish History give us a little bit more background about the battle itself. If you'd like to hear more from Stuart McHardy, check out the Scottish History playlist on our YouTube channel.
Several claimants to the throne came forward, the most notable being John Balliol and Robert Bruce. Stupidly though, the Guardians asked Edward I to help choose a candidate, and when he picked Balliol, it soon became obvious that he was little more than Edward's puppet. His nickname, Toom Tabard, or Empty Coat, gives an idea of the quality of the man. In 1296 he was deposed. A treaty was signed with England's other historic enemy, France, the start of the Old Alliance, and Edward marched north with a great army, his intention to simply annex the country of Scotland. Within a year, the Guardians of Scotland became the focus of resistance to the invader, and one of them, William Wallace, had a famous victory over Edward at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Although later defeated at Falkirk the following year, Wallace would continue to lead the resistance till he was betrayed in 1305. In a situation where the enemy could muster many more troops than the Scots had available, both Wallace and Bruce often used small-scale, fast-moving forces to harry and weaken the English. This type of what we would now call guerrilla warfare had been used as far back as Roman times by native warrior bands, drawing on the ancient traditions of intertribal cattle rearing. Edward I was known for being a ruthless, even brutal man, and hung King Robert's sister Mary in a cage in Roxburgh, subjecting Isabella, Countess of Buchan, who had crowned Robert king, to a similar fate at Berwick Castle. A feudal king, but not a paragon of chivalric knighthood. He clearly thought that his invasion and victories over the Scots had granted him overlordship of our ancient nation, but, like the Romans, Northumbrians and Vikings before him, he was wrong. Edward died on his way north on another campaign against the Scots in 1307, to be succeeded by his son, Edward II. Now, like his father, Edward II was dead set on conquering Scotland, and the war continued. By 1309, Robert Bruce had consolidated his position enough to hold a parliament, but he was still vulnerable, partly because he had been excommunicated by the Church after the murder of Comyn in Greyfriars Church in Dumfries. From 1310, the tide of battle began to turn in favour of the Scots, and this culminated in the Battle of Bannockburn near Stirling in 1314. Although heavily outnumbered by the English army led by Edward himself, and which had significant numbers of heavily armed cavalry, Bruce's tactics of using his predominantly infantry troops in schulterns or spear phalanxes won the day, and the English army was crushed. Some estimates of the casualties on the English side go as high as 11,000 of the original 16,000 soldiers, though one English chronicler later claimed it was around 1,200. Many stories have been told about this battle, and one local one is particularly colourful. It is said that towards the end of the battle, a great force of local people were seen approaching the battlefield, and the English troops thought they were military reinforcements. In fact, this was the local population, with a considerable number of women and children turning out to help win the day. All they had for weapons were tools, and in many cases, simply pots and pans, and I have been assured by a local that this is in fact where the phrase "to pan someone" arose. If nothing else, this version of events serves to remind us that history is actually about people and not just lairdies.
For the Bruce! For Scotland! And for freedom!
I think that's just a great wee, collage of information from different places and talking to different people. And for me, I particularly liked hearing more about where the battle might have been and what happened, because there's such obvious comparisons between what Bruce did at Bannockburn with what he did at the Battle of Loudon Hill. And, that's another podcast of ours. Amazingly good bit of military tactics. If anyone wants to go and watch it, it's still on YouTube channel. But yeah, I think, well done, Fiona. I think that was good.
So we'll put the links to the Loudon Hill episode below, and don't forget, check out our Scottish history playlist on our channel. Yep. You'll find all sorts in there.
Yep. And as usual, if you like it, share it. And if you really like us, buy us a coffee from coffee.com. Bye.
Catch you later. Bye.